You are a counselor. You are a confidant. You are a father figure, uncle figure. You are a social worker, marriage counselor, therapist, all these different roles. And that's what you are, even though it's not in your job description. But the point is, you have to know your students so you can do your role as an instructor to try and get the best out of them, because that's the aim of the game.
My guest for this episode is Andy Patton, co-host of the UK Karate Podcast. Andy started karate in 1999 after watching Walker, Texas Ranger, and tried to copy Chuck Norris' roundhouse kick in his grandmother's living room. Years later, the early interest grew into a long-term karate journey and eventually led him to co-host the UK Karate Podcast. In this conversation, we talk about Andy's karate journey, how the podcast started, and what he had learned from speaking with martial artists across from different generations. We also get into old school karate training, karate in the age of online information, politics in martial arts, cross-training, and why communication matters, both on podcasts and in the dojo. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Andy. Let's get started. Hello, Andy. Welcome to the Studio Podcast.
Hello, Swire. Thank you very much for having me on.
I'm excited. This is the first time that I invited another host for podcast to be on. And before we jump to that, Andy, I wanted to ask you more about your karate journey. Can you talk about that and how you guys started in training?
Yeah, of course. So it was back in 1999 where it officially started. I was one of these kids, if you will. I was told that I wasn't very good at this, wasn't very good at that. I tried football, and I was told I wasn't very good. I would say rounded out maybe August 1999. I was in my grandmother's living room watching Walker, Texas Ranger, starring the late Chuck Norris, and I was there. I was like in a Kamae position, fighting stance, and I was trying to perfect his roundhouse kick. I was trying to get it like Joe down, if you like. And my nan, she had this crystal on her fireplace, so she was just saying, "Oh, make sure you don't knock it over." And one day, my dad walked in through the door. He saw me. He's like, "Oh, well, like that, trying to get that roundhouse kick going." And he said to me, "Are you interested in karate?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then I found out my dad was into karate. He actually did it. And he used to be an instructor. And he was a black belt. And you can imagine like a 9-year-old me was like, "Oh, what? No way." So one Saturday, he took me down to the local lecture center and he made me watch a class. Couldn't tell you who was doing that class. I think they were doing the basics, maybe kata. And he said, "Right, okay, about half an hour, maybe more." I said, "Right, let's go." And we're walking down this long, narrow corridor. And he's like, "All right, are you really sure? Are you really sure you want to do this?" And I'm like, 9-year-old me, I'm like, "Yeah, I'm ready to do it." He's like, "Right, okay, next Saturday, I'll take you down." So he knew the chief instructor and he brought me to my first class back in 1999 and did the introduction, said to the 10th grade, like, "This is my son, he's interested. Are you taking on beginners?" And he left me there for 2 hours and I loved it. I loved it. And I stayed. And that's how it started, really, yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting story. And fast forward, you are the co-host for UK Karate Podcast. And this is a well received podcast in the UK. I was interested, how did you first started doing the podcast with your co-host?
So, firstly, thank you for your kind words in terms of us being well received. That means a lot. How did it start? Well, it was back in our old club, and we had a club WhatsApp chat. And Chris Walsh, my co-host and friend, put, "I'm thinking of starting a podcast. Does anyone else want to join?" Straight away, I'm looking at my phone, and I just said, "These were my words. Where do I sign?" And that is how I joined as the co-host of the UK Karate Podcast. And that's how it started, literally in a WhatsApp chat.
What did you guys want to talk about in the beginning? Is it focusing on getting better yourself, or try to talk to people who are more senior in training? Like, what's the purpose or the first mission when you guys first started out the podcast?
Bringing to life people's stories. There are so many karate stories out there from established karate instructors, worldwide karate instructors, and they're just not told. So we wanted to bring a platform where we could interview anybody who we wanted to and basically get them to tell their story, how it started, how it finished, if they did retire, that is, or how it's continuing, what's the future hold, and things like that. Because at the time, to our knowledge, nobody else was doing that until maybe like a few years later. But it was
How
just,
when did you guys started the podcast?
oh, I want to say at least we've been going for at least 2 or 3 years.
Hmm.
Yeah, at least 2 or 3 years, definitely. And that was the idea, just to bring a platform for people to share their karate stories, really, in the hopes of that it's going to perhaps inspire somebody else. I mean, it inspires me. So I'm sat there listening to the established karateka, and it's just getting their name out there as well. Because the other thing to slightly digress, we interview all different kinds of karateka. So you've got, we call them the old guard who are retired, but they paved the way and inspired people like myself and Chris. And you've got the younger generation. So you've got your Haydens, you've got Stuart Amos, and you've got John Gardner, and you've got that sort of category there. And then you've got the ones who are sort of, they're in between there. So you've got your Matt Prices, you've got your Simon Bly, for example, Scott Langley. So they're not quite the old guard because they haven't retired, but they are still arguably pillars of karate because people are still learning from them. They are still established instructors. So for me, it's like you've got the younger generation, you've got the established instructors, yeah, and the old guard who have retired. So three different types of people, and it's just brilliant to bring those stories alive. Because if we didn't, there was them there.
Yeah, it's interesting that you just mentioned that. That was my exact question. So, from talking to the older generation and the younger generation, do they feel the same way within their arts, or do you notice that even though they might use words differently and their approach was the same? Like, do you notice a pattern there?
So the older generation, and also in the era of arguably 70s, 80s, and 90s, was hard, fast, stronger. So you had to just get on with it. So you didn't miss a session. You just train, and train. You were injured, nobody cared. Get on with it. That was the older generation's training, and it was harder. So you could, as an example, you do press ups on your knuckle, or rather, you did press ups on your knuckles. You did lineups. There was gum shields. I'm going to say gum shields were introduced probably maybe 90s. I could be wrong on that, but it was bare knuckle. Gum shields, when they were brought in, they were optional. You didn't have to wear gum shields in competition.
Mm-hmm.
Competitions were bigger. Training for competitions was different. Whereas now, it's from a younger generation, it's a lot different because I think there's so much more out there in terms of training. Whereas the older generation, you only had a few associations. Now you have so many. And now there's the health and safety aspect of karate. So we don't do things like perhaps press ups on the knuckles or lifting each other up and doing squats or these like these drills such as where you have a line of people on the floor and one person runs over their stomach.
Mm.
They don't exist anymore. So it's a lot different. Whereas back then you could get away with that. Definitely.
So do you think it's for the better, or in your opinion now, what do you think of that?
I talk about this often on the podcast. I think a little bit of both, and I'm gonna sort of justify that, or try and justify that. Harder, faster, stronger. Where he taught me resilience, determination, and hard work. Now, the flip side of that, the longer stances, the weight on my body, the endless hit work. Well, you could argue that's caused me an injury, which is the downside. Do I think karate's changed for the better? Yeah, again, it's yes and no. I think there's a lack of, arguably, there's a lack of respect, which in some situations, where back then, when I was a child and I went to the dojo, that was it. It was always like what Sensei said goes. Nowadays, it's a little bit, you could argue, you expect is a little bit more relaxed. The strictness, I suppose, is a little bit more relaxed in some places. I'm not speaking for all dojos. And I think there's a lot less fear to approach a sensei these days. Because back then you wouldn't give that. Oh, sensei, I've got a question. No, I haven't got a question because again, whereas now, as you know, I have conversations with people who are way higher than me in terms of hierarchy. So I think the barriers for being able to go and approach your sensei or a sensei are different. And I think as well, it's more challenging in terms of there's lots out there. Just like I digress, kids have a choice. People have a choice. There was only perhaps going back with the older generation, you had a few clubs, or let's say, for instance, the judo club was up the road. So it didn't affect your club or your membership. Nowadays, you've got Brazilian jiu-jitsu, you've got kickboxing, you've got swimming, you've got just more normal boxing, even MMA.
You have phones and you have video games.
Yeah, I was coming to that. Yes, exactly that. Whereas you didn't. I suppose it's like a seesaw. It has and it hasn't. Because I think sometimes drills are needed to build character and build resilience. I'm not saying, I would personally recommend an instructor saying to audience, right, everyone line up and run over their stomachs, because I think the safety aspect has improved. I think that's brilliant. But I think it has changed for the better in that respect. At the same time, in terms of maybe respect and discipline, perhaps it has slipped a little bit. So sort of for me, it's like this on the scales, if I'm honest.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the reason that kind of attributed that is because the amount of information that we have access to right now, right, is a lot. So, for example, you mentioned Hayden and John Gardner. Both of them are present on social media, and they put out a lot of content, right? A lot of drills, a lot of different scenario how you do it. like back in the days, if you talk about the old guard, right, you don't have that. So the only way that you learn is to attend lesson at the dojo, or maybe in the 80s, late 70s, you have the magazines, right? You get it once a month. But right now, if I wanted to, I've been go on YouTube for the whole day. I can watch endless, information about. So I think it's good and bad. It's good that we have access to information, but at the same time, do you feel that in the age that we're in, we're kind of overwhelmed? And do you feel like people now practicing, they just want to be good in 90 days because there's a lot of program. They promise you 90 days you have apps and 90 days you could do whatever. Do you think that can sometimes affect the training in karate?
Yeah, I do. I think we've all been aware of what we call muck dojos, and I think perhaps back in the 80s, 90s, it was harder for the muck dojos because it was kind of like word of mouth. There wasn't the internet, so they struggled to share their content and get the word out. That and when you mentioned YouTube, well, yeah, I think because we are so technological based in a way, then yeah, people are going to be like, right, okay, I'm going to be a black belt within 90 days because somebody on YouTube has said so. So the downside of technology in terms of karate, and it's not just karate, it's every single martial art, it's it's easy access via the technology, but at the same time, it's the downside because you have got these characters who are 11th dans or 10th dans or something like that, and they've got a vehicle to get their content out in a better way. So yeah, totally, it harms karate in a way, and other martial arts, of course, as well. Um, One being Aikido. I feel Aikido gets the brunt of it, to be honest, because all you see is people just pushing people and they do these flips like that.
Yeah. If going to talk to all the guests that you have, are there a couple of things or are there a couple of characteristics that you could highlight that, oh, because they're at the level, they normally have that? Like, are there things that you could point out that, we could all learn from it?
Mindset, definitely mindset, because they got an idea of where they want to be or where they went. And that's because they had in their head originally a path and they didn't stray from the path. So they had goals, they had objectives. So the younger generation, that could be getting more exposure. For the older generation, perhaps that could be getting onto the England squad or something like that. So they have focus and determination. And that's the reoccurring thing that I've learned is they knew where they wanted to go and they've gone and done it because they've been passionate about it and they've not let anything get in their way. The guest had to get over to get around it. So Matt Price Sensei was told he wasn't good at karate. He was one of the worst students, and he also had a hip injury at 23. He got around both of those obstacles, and that's the reoccurring theme: is these guys know where they want to go, or themes rather, and they get around it. So it's inspiring.
So is this something that you think they developed themselves or they somehow were able to find a sensei or like a guru, right? So to uncover their minds, like, is it normally self exploration or something that was guided, through those mindsets?
I think it depends on the person. So I think some people, yeah, they've had a sensei who's been like, right, this is where you're going. I believe in you. You can do it. Others, they haven't. So an example of that, you could take Rob Bingham sensei. Now, Rob Bingham is brilliant. He's a brilliant practitioner, but he hasn't really potentially got anybody because of where he is and in the local area to sort of say to him, right, okay, Rob, if you want to grade, this is what you're going to have to do. Thankfully, he's been lucky and he's found Justin Booty Sensei who lives in the local area. Now, although they're two different organizations, Justin Sensei will still help Rob, still help him out. So it is very difficult, and I'm gonna say depends on individual circumstances as well.
Mhm.
And so I think overall, I think it could be somebody in the corner and say, yeah, you can do it, playing that sort of cheerleader role, or the desire has overcome this person so much that they're just going to do it with or without help.
Yeah, that actually lead me to this question. When we have enough people in the room, obviously there is certain opinion and it becomes politics. And sometimes it kind of affect how the group will work, the dynamics, right? Or sometimes we don't like to be controlled sometimes, but we have to kind of play within the rules. Like from your point of view, what are some of the challenges in politics and karate that you have noticed about?
Biggest challenge overall is associations are scared to let other people train with other senseis. Not all associations, to add to that. And this became, in perhaps some associations' point of view, a problem. Now, if we go back a bit, we look at COVID, right? So COVID, as you and I both know, you couldn't attend a dojo. So what did instructors do? They created, well, classes on Zoom. I was going to say they created Zoom, but I don't think they did. Somebody else did, because I can't take credit for that. So they created classes on Zoom. And then before you know it, you have the likes of perhaps John Garner, yeah, or other instructors who were just putting their content on Zoom. I say John Garner, he might have started before, but I'm just using him as an example. You had these online instructors getting content out there. So that means, going back to the technology question earlier, again, we're going back to it's accessible. Content is there. We can get it. So this has created a problem for the other associations because they want you to be under their banner, and that's it. Loyal. Be loyal to the banner, and you don't stray anywhere else. So it's quite, if you like, one track, blurred vision. And whether they're scared that they'll lose members, whether they're scared that when they will lose a club, maybe it's the power, maybe it's the control, it could be anything, to be honest. But the primary reason, in my opinion, and having partly experienced it, is certain associations don't like people training with other sensei.
Like cross training or just, other style of karate? Because so I know a lot of people now, especially right now, they train multiple arts. They might be in kickboxing, they might be in jujitsu, they may be karate, or they might do other crazy things, right? So
Mm.
like the purists still against that, in your opinion, in the politic part of it, right?
You know what? That's a brilliant in terms of how you just summed that up. Yes, they are purely. I think that's what they are, and I think it's both. In my experience, as of yet, I've not really come across any situations where someone said to me, "Oh, I've been told that I can't do kickboxing or I can't do jujitsu." It's more they can't do another karate style, or they couldn't have the other sensei who is in a different association. He's only 20 minutes down the road, come and do a session because he's in a different organization, or perhaps he's independent. Because the view with the purist is, what are you going to learn from them? Absolutely nothing. When you actually are, because you've got to think of this situation is, or think of this situation that the associations are holding people back, because you've got to have, in my opinion, a karate toolbox where you've got loads of ways of doing a different technique, as an example, perhaps, or if you're an instructor, you've got loads of different ways of teaching. or as a student, you've got knowledge. I mean, that's the aim of the game, isn't it? Karate is there to not only help you within self-defense, but it's knowledge as well. Knowledge is power. So that could be another reason why the associations decide to say, right, no, what? The curtains are shut. You're not to train anywhere else, because they want to believe that they have all the knowledge, and they feel perhaps they're losing power.
Hmm.
Also, it's rivalry as well. It is rivaling, and it's not just the associations trying to get their clubs to fall in line. It's the associations perhaps losing out to a rival. So this, as an example, let's say an instructor left the organisation because of politics, maybe the same reason, and then the association finds out, well, the club wants to train the instructor who's left the association, or they feel it's betrayal. It gets a little bit emotional then, where it's like, how dare you? You've betrayed me. You're going to train with this sensei who's 30 minutes away, and he's in a different or Shiba is in a different organization, which is a splintered faction, if you want, of the organization you're already in. And it's bonkers. It's absolutely mad, because no matter whether we're independent or what association we're in, we'll put on a game. We all have to thirst for learning.
Yeah. I'm putting my neck on the line here, but I do wanted to leave it at this one, because in karate, in the kata itself, we have throwing technique. It's hidden, right, in all the kata. But a lot of time, if you do appearance, you don't really learn how to fall. But at the same time, if you cross train in judo, the first thing they learn is how to fall. So by knowing how to fall and then going back to your kata, you can actually practice that, because now you could pick someone up, and then your your partner, actually know how to fall, so you don't kill the partner in one shot. And also, if you do sometimes branch out to jiu-jitsu, right? So all the wrist lock in the advanced kata, actually how to manipulate the joint better. So I think if a pure standpoint, they're against cross training, but I do think that cross training can enhance your own skills, maybe not in the beginning, so you kind of overwhelmed with all the information, but maybe when you get to a certain level, you become somewhat an expert in your art, you should go branch out to see what's out there, because the world is really big.
Absolutely, 100%. I just want to go back to your point there with regards to pros. Pros are in judo, but they also are a part of kata as well. And I'm sort of going to digress, because in a way, it's not always the association's fault or the club's fault that these things can't be practiced because of time. But having said that, arguably we should make the time to practice these things. And again, karate's evolving as well. If the purists, if you will, if they're just stuck training and doing one thing, because as an example, going up and down the hall doing Kion, then that's all you're going to learn. It's not going to work in a street environment, because you're not going to take 1 moment. Excuse me, Mr.
You're
Attacker.
not good. Get a deep front stance, right?
Yeah, exactly. You knew where I was going with that one. Just let me. I'll step back and do Agiyuki.
Let me stretch.
Yeah, let me stretch. It's not going to work. I mean, I'm quite fortunate, because I'm in the HDKI who support us in collaboration, and they don't tell us you can't go and train there, you can't do this, and things like that. So I'm very fortunate, and I think nowadays pros are becoming back into fashion, because of the ongoing situation with the streets. And I don't want to sound really morbid or put a downer on the mood for this episode, but let's be real, let's be honest, the streets aren't safe. And I think as well, it's on the instructor to make sure that the throws or bunker, as we know it within a kata, are covered as well. But again, that could be, if they're not covered, maybe because of time, or maybe another reason, to be honest, but they should be covered.
Let's go back to the podcast itself. You have talked to a lot of guests, from an experienced one, from a young one. In your view, what makes someone a guest to be a good podcast guest themselves?
Collaboration. So you've got to think of it like this: the guest and the podcaster are in a partnership. And this partnership is focused on getting the best out of each other. So the guest, let's say a young instructor, they want their name out there. We'll say, let's say if it's an instructor, it's not quite the old guard. They want to perhaps share their story and hopefully maybe inspire others. If it's someone who's retired and they are the old guard, maybe they just want to share their story because they've achieved quite a lot. Maybe again, I'm just guessing, but in terms of what makes a guest a good guest, if you will, is the collaboration. But that's also on the podcast, and the guest has got to have respect. Now, for example, we use a studio. Now, you're coming in as a guest, you're coming into their space, that person's space. You have to be respectful and things like that. And you got to understand boundaries as well. So, as an example, I'm not going to turn around and say to you, right, this is what, go off on a tangent and talk about a different subject. I'm following your lead in that respect because, I have respect for that this is your podcast, you've invited me on, and we're here to talk about whatever you'd like to talk about. And, which is good because you've got to, you help each other. The guest is going there to get, like I said, get their name out or whatever it might be. And the podcaster is trying to promote their podcast. So it's got to be collaboration. If you haven't got the collaboration, it's not going to work. And all you're going to do is you're going to come out with a potentially bad episode, which isn't good for you and it isn't good for the guest. And it probably won't even be worth sharing because your audience will be like, what on earth is that? And before you know it, your viewership was probably up here and it's going down like that. And that's what you don't want. And they've got to make you feel comfortable as well. And you've got to make them feel comfortable. It's literally, for me, 50-50 partnership, not 70 or 30%, 50-50 straight down the middle. Honesty and transparency as well. So the guest has to be potentially honest, how they feel, what they want to talk about, what they are perhaps passionate about, things like that, really.
What would you recommend if there are karateka out there who are, really passionate about what they believe in and they wanted to become a guest on a podcast? How should they prepare for themselves, or what should they talk about? Can you touch on that a little bit?
So ultimately, what the guest needs to do, they need to provide you with a story. Now, how far they go within the story, that could be dependent on the guest. Like you said, are they retired? Okay, so it's going to start perhaps from 1980 to 2002 as a couple of examples. If they're ongoing, even though they've trained for 50 years, you're absolutely right. You can't get into one episode 50 years worth of karate. You could do it in segments. You could do it like that. But that's on the host. I always tell my guests that there's always part two. Yeah. And they sort of look at me like, really? I'm like, yeah. You didn't see the T's and C's. But it's all, I suppose it's like it's what you want to cover as the guest, as the host, what you want to cover. What is it that you're trying to find out from the guest? Is it 50 years of karate, or is there one particular aspect that you're trying to find out from that guest, which is going to be beneficial to you and beneficial to your listeners? And that's what you're also trying to achieve as a podcaster as well. But it's ultimately, it's up to the guest to provide you with the content.
I know both you and I, before we talk to a guest, we like to go on the internet. We do notes for the guests, and we like to find out as much as we can as is available to us about the guests, and then we try to ask intelligent questions, right? So we, as a host, we also wanted to have an engaging conversation that people like to listen to. So sometimes it's not our job to intervene, but we wanted to keep it in a flow that people can really understand the concept. Because if this is something really abstract or something really high level, only a certain expert can understand. We'll try to, what I call it, like to tone it down. So maybe everyone who is interested in the conversation can get a little piece of the information. Maybe it really will take them 20 years to understand this concept, but at least we know that it's there. That's why initially I asked you about the mindset question, and you answered perfectly, right? You got to have the right mindset to be well. So maybe we don't have it today, but we know that that's out there. So maybe we really put in our time, maybe in 20 years, maybe in a lifetime, then we might have it. So I think it's walking a fine line, right? So you want to highlight a certain thing, but we also don't want it to be too technical sometimes. So we'll lose like 99% of listeners.
Yeah, and I think in terms of technicality, you've got to like think that there's an off chance that somebody doesn't even know about karate or martial art. They could tune in. And if we start talking like Yakuzuki, well, they're going to be like, what's Yakuzuki? No idea. No idea at all. Because as well, you're sort of creating, you are providing a service to your listeners. You're trying to provide a service that, your content's easily accessible, but it's easily understandable as well. So that's why I think in terms of technicality, it's important to say, you know, like Yakuzuki is reverse punch, and or Ian Shodan is the first kata as well. So that is important because you just don't want to mind blow your audience to the point where like, right, okay, it's been 5 minutes, I'm switching off now. Right, where's the next podcast? So you've got to be really, really, really careful with that. And I suppose in a way, because the guest is not going to potentially think about that, they're just going to be relaying the story or theme, whatever it is that you're trying to get from them. So then that's your job as a podcaster to sort of, make the technicality of it easier for people to understand.
Do you think communication is something that a martial artist, if he or she wants to get better, should train like the technique or the kata? That's what that we're doing. Because knowing to do something yourself is your own journey. But then can you actually use your words, especially we're talking about podcasts, can you use your words to motivate or teach other how to do the same things that you can do? Do you think that's a difficult skill sometimes to learn communication?
I think communication, yeah, you're right. I think it's a skill in itself. Shouldn't be practiced. Yes, I do. I do. I agree with you. I do think it should be practiced. But how do we practice it? Should we be standing in front of the class practicing our communication? Yes, but at the same time, by the way, being the enemy in a sense, because you could have an hour session, you've got to try and get the class moving as well. You don't want people to become cold. The best way to sort of tailor your communication is you've got to read the room. You've got to look at people and think, right, I've done this drill. What's that student saying? Well, what's the facial expression like? What's body language like? Are they like this? Like, or are they like, I don't understand. And you've also got to take into account in terms of communication that people receive it in many, many different ways. So there's no point, in my opinion, as an instructor or somebody who's leading a class, just standing there talking. Because, yeah, that will work for a portion of your students, but that's not going to work for a student who learns by seeing. So a visual learner, that's not going to work for a student who's kinesthetic, who learns by doing movement. And again, it's like bringing it sort of full circle with the podcast. We're providing service to people. So you have to ensure that you are a good communicator by analyzing yourself and being accountable. Because if not, you're holding yourself back and you're not going to progress as a class, and, in particular, students aren't going to progress either. And it's just going to become stagnant to the point people are going to leave. For me, I love it when instructors join in. I love it rather than an instructor just be like, right, this is what we're doing. Let's join in.
That's a really great way to put it. The student's ability, the student itself, even if they not know the art for a long time, they can sense the communication skills of the instructor. That goes both ways. It's a mutual experience, because if they feel connected with you and they want to learn from you, then they will stay. If they feel like you don't get me, right?
And I just want to, you mentioned a really interesting point there. And in terms of, do you get me? Well, let's be honest, the majority of the, students we teach are kids. So what I did back in the old club when I was going to inherit the class and start my instructor journey is I got to know all of them. So the way I did that is I started speaking with them. Saying, yeah, hi, how are you? How you doing? You all right? Been up too much? Just general chit chat, small talk. And then even to this day, I continue that. And then I have what's called an invisible open door. And I think that's important. The open door, what that is, I don't make the kids open it, by the way. It's just in my head. It's basically an opportunity for them to say, right, sensei, you know what? I had this issue at school. I've got this issue at home. I'm not feeling it today. I'm not feeling very well. This is going on. That's going on. And it's up to you as the sensei to try and help them and navigate them. Because if we digress for a moment, you're not just a sensei. You're not. You are a counselor. You are a confidant. You are a father figure, uncle figure. You are a social worker, marriage counselor, therapist, all these different roles. And that's what you are, even though it's not in your job description. But the point is, you have to know your students so you can do your role as an instructor to try and get the best out of them, because that's the aim of the game. If you don't know them, then it's difficult, yeah, but there are ways around it. Again, you go back to reading the room. We were talking, I went to Hayden's dojo in Scotland. I didn't know any of the Hayden students at all. No, I didn't. I didn't let them in my life. But I read the room. Before I did that, I put my hand out, I shook hands. How are you? Are you all right? Thank you for being here. Just made them feel at ease. And I think that's what you've got to do. You've got to try and make everyone feel at ease and can put your own nerves aside, because as we sort of touched on, it's hard, it's challenging, more challenging these days, arguably, the children and adults that perhaps rather was back in the, I don't know, maybe in the 90s, because of technology, as we've talked about, and things like that.
We could really explore really deep into just how to read the room, because there are people who join because they want to be tough, whatever that might be, or they want the hardcore stuff, like you said, stepping on your stomach and then maybe squatting with your sensei on it. Maybe there are people out there who like that, but if they go to a dojo, then you don't do that. Then they don't feel they're getting their money worth, so to speak. But then at the same time, you talk about the kids class, parents drop them off, try to help them a positive experience, right? Maybe they sit at home, on their phone for a long time. They just want to do something physical, right? To learn how to have the right mindset to approach later on the adult life. So they approach the experience in a different way. And by you, or maybe if you have senpai, think about different people, or maybe you could create a scenario where this class is all about physical challenges, or maybe these are some of the class or schedule that we do mindset or something that more friendly to beginners. So I think as an instructor, you could think about doing things in a way that kind of cater to works for everyone. Or if you really are a purist, like we're talking about, maybe advertise just that. What did they want out from this experience? And it's your job to meet them where they are and to show them the way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think as well, you've got to set expectations. It's daunting, isn't it, starting something new? So if we get the student who just walked in and they want to learn all of these pros, or they set their sights on, I want to be a black belt in 6 months. You have to set their expectations, saying, unfortunately, that's not how it works. This is how it works. And that's the reason for that is because we have so many belts before, etc. And you've got to work with them. Again, it's going back to what I was saying in terms of the podcast. It's a partnership, isn't it? It's collaboration. Ultimately, you want what's best for the student as an instructor, and you want what's best for your club. The last thing you want is students to leave because they're not happy with what they're learning. And that's a challenge in itself because students aren't always going to be happy with what they're learning. You've got the classic students who are right, ready to go. When's it Kumite? When we're sparring? And then you've got the students who are like, oh, you know what? And so please, I'd rather do a bit of kata tonight. So that in itself is a challenge. But for me, it's all about setting expectations, and as well, you're doing a service. I mean, I had one student who started, I'm gonna say, been with us now for a few weeks, and I walked. I didn't even know. I'd just finished work, and I was going to get changed. I didn't even know they were behind me. It was a long day at work, and I realized they were behind me. I was like, "Hi, how are you? How are you doing?" I said, "Right, okay, come through." It's like the dojo's your home. You invite them into your home, and they're like, "This is so and so. They're a brown belt. Da, 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 da. This is, I'm one of the instructors, the chief instructor in here. Here he is. Sensei, this is, and you make the introduction. You put them at ease, and you show them around. You give them, I suppose what I'm trying to say is you give them an induction, and you set expectations. And in my opinion, not many clubs do that. Certainly didn't when I first started out.
It's intimidating, right? For the first time you walk on, everyone is better than you, and it's the hard things to get in the beginning.
And that goes into mindset a little bit, because I think you're right. I think the first time you walk in the building, yeah, 100%, you're intimidating. You're sort of like this in the line, aren't you? Like, but then you've got to try and use that intimidation as a weapon to your advantage. When I was a kid, I was going up through the ranks. I always looked up the line in admiration of the black belt. 100%, no doubt. But then when it came to sparring, I was like, right, where is the nearest black belt? Well, let's have it. Because that's the only way you're going to learn. You
Yeah.
pick the best person to learn. And that helps you with your own intimidation as well. And the thing is, I'm going to bring, tie this into what we're talking about in the podcast. We're just people. Everybody's a person. So it doesn't perhaps matter if someone is a lot higher than you in the hierarchy. They're a person. That's it. When they're not wearing a gi, they're just like me and you. They have perhaps a day job, and that's it.
Yeah, I think the podcast right now, especially a big format, right? You can actually get to speak to a lot of different people. You can touch on maybe in your geographical area, right? 1 hour drive away from where your dojo is or where you teach is at. With your communication, right? Do you think Sensei would love to be on a podcast, or there are still some that doesn't want to share that much because they were afraid that people might not like the way that they think or teach us?
Great question. And yeah, I do. I think there are senseis who don't want to be on the podcast because, in my experience, it's because they're scared of what they're going to say. They're scared that they might, put their foot in it. And the other side to that is they believe they haven't got a story. And the other side to that, so I guess it's in three different parts, is they don't want to be known. They just want to just carry on and do whatever, in terms of training they want to do. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's absolutely fine. The podcast guest has to be there because they want to be there, and that ties into the student. You are providing, to link this to what we're talking about. Again, with the podcast, you provide a service. You've got to set expectations. You can't just say to a sensei, right, I'm doing a podcast. I've got no idea what I'm going to ask you. I expect you to be on at 6 o'clock tonight, and we'll see you then. You can't, because they're going to be like, what, huh? It just doesn't work like that. Whereas you're setting the expectations, you know what you, as we've discussed, you as a podcaster, you want to cover, and you provide them with context. And again, that comes into professionalism, which also ties into teaching, because you want your guests to feel comfortable, you want them to provide a good episode, and you yourself want to be known as a podcaster. So you've got to show that you're being professional. And to do that, that's how you set the expectations and, try and get the best out of them. It's a difficult one as well, because I suppose, I don't know if you've experienced it, man. One of the hard realities of the podcast that I've experienced is there's someone I know who's got a great story and he just won't tell it despite how many times you ask Sensei, please be on the podcast, please. And that's lied, unfortunately. So
You watching who a good guest for your podcast will be, but your potential guests are also watching who you are as a host.
yeah, and I think you're right. I think it is a trust. And I think you're right. They are watching. So if you or I have interviewed a friend of theirs, they're going to be like, oh, actually, oh, they're all right. Or is it a case of talking to somebody you know who knows them to see if they'll put in a word in for you? Again, it's all about who you know. It's not easy. It's very tricky. It's hard. People think it's easy to get guests on a podcast. No, it's not.
It's not.
No,
It's not.
it's not. No. But over time, no, it does get better because you put out your content. People know who you are. People know what you're about. You've got fellow collaborators who are willing to share your content as well. And it's all about getting your name out there. And again, that links it back to the younger generation instructors who want to get their name out there. And, in essence, the podcast is in the same boat as they are.
I know that there are sensei and there are more people who want to take advantage in this platform, right? Being a podcast host. So any words of advice for people who are thinking about starting a podcast or already started a podcast and agree with what we just talked about, trying to find a guest?
So, any advice for future podcasters? Well, first thing, stop thinking about it and do it. If that's what you want to do. And do your research. Do your research on a guest. Don't do what I did on a episode. Fran, who was over Fran Charlton, we had her on our podcast and I didn't do my research. And I just assumed that she was a showdown. So a first dan black belt. She's not. She's a lot higher than that. And it put me in an awkward situation because Fran, quite rightly, said something on the lines of, what made you think I'm a first dan black belt showdown? And I'm like, and then my co then Chris is sort of looking at me like, Andy didn't do his research, did he? No, I didn't. That's the lesson. So make sure you do your research. Make sure you know what you want to do. So what is it a case of, do you want to talk about a story? Is it a case of you want to talk about your story? Is it a theme? Decide what you want to do and why are you doing it? That's important. Why? Are you doing it because it's just to pass the time, or are you doing it because it's passionate? You are rather passionate about it and you want to make it work. Where do you see your podcast going?
Hmm.
How long are you going to do it? Is this just 10 episodes, or is this going to be a long term thing? And if so, how are you going to do it? How are you going to schedule everything as well? Because don't forget, you could have a full time job, you could have a family. You've got to think logically how you're going to fit your podcast in. And I would also say, look at other podcasters as well. Watch other podcasters. And that gives you tips on how to present yourself as well. So you also have to think as well that you're not in competition with anybody. You're a podcaster. The main aim for you is to better your content each episode. That's it. That's simple as that. You're not. And that's my own personal opinion. I don't see any other podcaster a competitor, if you like, not at all, because I think you can't have enough podcasts, and I think people are talking about different things. Even if somebody from another podcast was talking about a karate story, well, as you mentioned earlier, with a technique, they're going to be talking about it and presenting that story in a different way to what you are as well. So that's important. And have your own style. So if you are researching and looking at other hosts, don't copy them. Do you relax and trust yourself? But most importantly, stop thinking about it and just do it.
That's great advice, Andy. And that goes to the host too. The world is big out there. Maybe your personality doesn't click with someone. Doesn't mean that the rest of the world, there's no one to like your personality. So do it your own way, and you learn from others, but then you wanted to keep it your own style because that what makes you unique. And do your research. Thanks for sharing the story. I think in the day of internet, in the day of AI, then it's a lot easier than to, let's say, maybe 20, 30 years ago. It's almost impossible, right? If they're not in your immediate circle, you can't really find out anything about a person. You in the UK and the US, like we can get to talk. So that shows everyone that it's only your mindset, right? You could really talk to anyone in the world right now.
Absolutely, you can. And that's the blessing of technology. You can talk to everybody or anybody in the world. And the other thing, you've got to be realist as well. There's loads of people, thousands, maybe millions of people, they've got a karate story. And that could be, I know we focus mainly on black belts. You've got your others, you've got your students, they've all got stories. Even the white belt stepping into the dojo first time, they've got a story. Why are they there? As an example. So you've got to be realistic and like you're not going to run out of content. Never, ever. And be realistic in terms of getting your content out. Is it like is it such a bad thing that you don't get your content out every month? Well, you might lose listeners, but if it's not physically possible, then that's just be where you communicate. You just communicate to your listeners and say, next episode will be out. Da, 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 da. Again, it's going back to what we're saying. It's important to communicate. To set expectations with your listeners. Definitely.
And I think it's fun too. Like I'm sure that you do, and you learn a lot of new information yourself too from your research, from just asking the simple question to your guests. Sometimes it opens up doors for the host as well. Like I learned so many more things that I normally wouldn't have. And then I love networking in general anyway. So it opens up a lot more doors for me. And as a host, we have guests that we know that know us and trust us enough will come on. And we also have guests that a reach, right? A higher reach, like maybe people in a better quote unquote social status in the journey as we are right now. But at some point, like my goal is to reach those people and really ask them the questions that I've been having for a long time, because I like to ask dumb questions sometimes, right? So like maybe people are too afraid to ask because they think it's dumb. Like I don't mind putting myself out there, and that's just me.
And that's the best way to be. And like you mentioned that you're searching for knowledge, because going back to one of your original questions, you're sat there, you're listening to new stories, and you're like, well, right, that's going to make me a better person in karate, because they managed to get around that obstacle, or they had that particular mindset with regard to something. And that's what it's all about. It's all about better, trying to, I suppose what I'm trying to say is you're taking something from a guest without even potentially realizing it. Because knowledge they're providing you, the inspiration they're providing you, makes you, for me, personally, makes you want to do other things and things like that. Or it provides you with options. So, for example, I'm coming up to 37, which over here, where I'm a vet, in competition, I'm a veteran. So for me, talking to a lot of guests, I found the next chapter of what I'm going to do when I do eventually retire from active competition and things like that. And that's what you're doing. You're also getting information of the guests to help yourself. So you are being a little bit selfish in that way.
Yeah, sometimes.
But if you want to achieve something, you have to be a little bit selfish. Otherwise, you're not going to potentially achieve it, are you? Maybe. But it could be down to circumstances.
Well, Andy, can you tell listener more about the UK's Karate Podcast and how listener can reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are on Facebook. We're on Spotify and Instagram. We're also on YouTube as well. If you literally just put in any search engine, UK Karate Podcast, you will find us, and you can access all of our content. And feel free to leave us some feedback. Tell us, or if you know somebody who wants to be a guest, drop us a message. We'll get back to you as soon as we can.
Thank you so much, Andy, for coming on today. I really have a great chat with you.
I really enjoyed it. Part 2, maybe? You never know. Who knows?
Yeah, always want you to join me back for part 2. I don't think we will run out of things to say.
Oh no, we could talk for ages.
Yeah.
But no, in all seriousness, thank you for having me, and hopefully you've got a great episode.
Yeah, thank you, Andy.
Thank you.